Welcome back to Inside the Pastor's Study Podcast. I'm Pastor Jeremy.
And I'm Pastor George.
And it's good to be back. We're here on a Wednesday afternoon now.
Yeah.
Trying to get a podcast in before you head off on a vacation. That's great. Yeah, so...
I'm so excited.
I bet. Yeah, get a chance to go up north. See some cool stuff you've never seen before.
Yes,
right?
We've never gone north. South, yes. But
yeah. There's not a lot of north left when you live north of Boston.
That's true.
But you guys are on your way up into our an America's Hat, a tour of America's Hat. So
yes.
Up through Canada. You guys should have a great time there. Did you see Yellowstone closed? Speaking of...
I saw that. In fact, we have been watching videos like religiously in our household of that, having been to Yellowstone last year, and just we're seeing places just obliterated with water that we have been to.
Oh, man.
And there's that picture of the road with the river running by it and where the road used to be. And we were on that road several times.
Huh.
And at the time, last year, that river, that raging river, was a creek bed. It was really just very simple, and there were guys wading out and they're fly fishing, and it's just wild.
Wow.
Just wild. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, well, I'm sure you didn't tune into the podcast to hear about that. But actually, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you never quite know what you're tuning in to listen to. That's kind of the joy of this podcast.
Everything.
Yeah, we kind of chat about whatever. This is your chance to hear what it's like to hang out in our office, grab a cup of coffee, and hear some of the things that are on our mind or the things that we're wrestling with. Most of the time, those are theological wrestlings, but not always. And this is our chance to have those conversations with you as kind of a fly on the wall and sitting in with us. And if there's ever something that you feel like you need to react to or have a question about, you can always reach out to podcast@marshcorner.com.
Yeah, spit that out one more time.
Yeah, podcast@marshcorner.com.
Thanks.
And that gives you a chance to interact with us a little bit. But one of the things that we love to start off our discussions with is our theological term of the week.
The theological term of the week.
And we've been working through salvation words.
Yes, we have.
Last time we were together, we hit the big one. We talked about justification.
Yes.
And the way that brings us back to square, brings us back to zero. And you know, it's not just a forgiveness, but it's a refilling back to square one, so to speak.
Yes.
So what's the next word?
So the next word is sanctification.
Yeah, these two go hand in hand, right?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So what's sanctification?
So the word sanctification comes from a Latin root for sanctus, to be made holy. Mm-hmm. So sanctification is the working of the working upon or the development of our holiness. So here's a cool concept. Justification brings us back to zero, right? But sanctification is when I am being added onto, right? God doesn't just zero out my debt. He starts to build my bank. And that's a pretty cool concept. I had this illustrated to me many, many years ago. I was watching my favorite Christmas Carol version, which is the George C. Scott version of the Christmas Carol.
I'm partial to the Muppets, but George C. Scott runs second.
Yeah. And I mean, I really have never gotten into the
the Star Wars Trek
the Star Wars guy, the Star Trek guy.
Don't mess those two up.
Don't mess them up. Sorry, you messed me up there. I've never gotten into the Star Trek guy version because I just have always thought the George C. Scott version was so good.
Yeah.
So there's this one scene where the young Ebenezer Scrooge has been at this boys' school forever, and his sister and father come to bring him home. And the sister's all excited. We're gonna bring you home for Christmas, and we're gonna be a family again. And they get out to the coach where the father is, and the father's like, no, a week. You're gonna be home with us for a week. I've already arranged an apprenticeship for you. I can't stand you. Kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And I saw that and I thought, there's the difference. This is weird. You're not going to make this. Maybe you're not going to make this equation, but I am, right?
All right, I'm following.
There's the difference between justification and sanctification, and how we often view these things, right? Justification is, I'm going to bring you home from this.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people who think, well, God brought me out of my sin, and now I've got to make this right.
Now I owe God.
Now I owe God, or God doesn't have an interest now in making me better. He's just like, I'm going to pay off your debt.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring you home, but I can't stand you.
Huh.
And so you're on your own from this point on. And there are way too many people who don't get this, that God didn't just save me to make me square and then send me out to try and make my life better. God saved me to keep me. He loves me. He wants me in his house, and he wants me to take on the structures of his house and his life. So it's like, I'm bringing you home from this sinful experience, and then I'm going to show you how to really live.
Yeah.
It's, stream of consciousness. It's the prodigal son story. It's, I've come home, and all I want to do is be made square, right? The prodigal son comes home. He says, all I want, Father, is to be made one of your servants. And the father says, break out the fatted calf, clean this boy up, put a new set of clothes on him, give him a ring. He's home, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be just like the household. We're gonna let him celebrate and enjoy the feast of this house and live as a son, right? Mm-hmm. Sanctification is my living as a son experience. I've not just been brought out of sin, but now God expects me to live in his house.
Yeah.
So sanctification is, here's what God wants of me. Here is God's plan for my living in his house and living in his rules and living under his plan. And that's how God is going to continue to build me. He's going to add to my bank.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to show me what he wants. He's going to show me his heart. He's going to show me his trade. He's going to show me how I should live my life based upon how he planned my life to be lived in the first place. And so God doesn't just justify us. He then sanctifies us. He cleans our lives up and shows us how to make our lives work.
Mm-hmm.
So there's our term.
Awesome. I love it. So that's sanctification, this week's theological term of the week.
The theological term of the week.
Last time we were together.
Yes.
It feels like it's been a bit. It kind of has. It's like a week and a half instead of a normal week. We were talking through finding our calling, right?
But let's just stop for a second. Lately, our weeks have been more like a week and a half anyway, so it's been like 2 weeks.
Month.
So go ahead, yeah.
Hey, friends, it's been hard. If you're just a friend of ours, it's just as a moment of like transparency. Pastoral ministry is always hard, but lately, very, very, very hard. So we covet your prayers. It's just been challenging. We love what we do, and we love our calling. It's been tough. So, just you're probably experiencing that in your workplace, in your families. You get how this works. And know that if we're aware of those things in your life and you're part of our church, we're praying for you. But that we would enjoy your prayers back also.
Yes.
But we're talking about finding calling and understanding that term calling and living into that calling. And one of the things that we left that conversation with, I think, recently was that any kind of calling that doesn't have at its center just Jesus as its center,
yes.
Right? That God is first and foremost. That our role in this world is to love God and serve Him forever. And in order to understand where you're supposed to go and what you're supposed to do in life, you have to start in that space of knowing that knowing who you've been created to be and who you've been created to serve. And you're going to find frustration anywhere that isn't rooted in those two things first.
Right.
So that was kind of our conversation recently. But I wanted to take that into some practical places, if at all possible. Like, what does that look like in our lives, and how do we work this thing out? How do we take something that feels conceptual, like God is my Lord, Jesus is my Lord, and I am going to put Jesus first? How do we take that conceptual thing and actually put legs on that and make it work?
Yeah, it's a tough thing.
It is hard because I think for a lot of us, we're walking through lives thinking that we've done that. Like, I go to church mostly, and I serve in a ministry, and I'm kind to my neighbors, and I don't kick the dog. Therefore, I've placed Jesus first in my life. And I think there's some more to it than that. Like, we talk about the way that you filter in life and make decisions, and all those things have to go through that filter of the gospel. So one of the things we want to talk about today is, it's a thing that God talks about quite a bit in his scriptures, and it's a way for us to, it's really just a wonderful barometer of our own priorities in life. And let's talk about what we do with our money.
Ooh, are we really going to talk about this?
Let's talk money. Yeah, we don't do that often. And I think as pastors, this is a thing we get nervous about because there is this stereotype of pastors and churches that all they want to do is talk about money.
Guys with white shoes.
Yeah, they just want me to donate to their newest thing. And hey, we don't actually want that. I don't own a private jet, and I don't really have an interest in that. Although I did grow up wanting to fly, but that's, I'm not going to own like the pastoral, like the Marsh Corner Community Church G3 is not in our future here.
No.
Or 6, is that what they're up to now in those?
I think it's up to 6, but you could use a 3.
I'll take a 3. Yeah.
No,
so we're not.
We have an airport nearby too. Come to think of it, you could.
All right, so never mind. We want you to donate. Send your checks to. No, so we're not into that. We're not interested in that.
Right.
And I think if you're a regular attender of our church, that's not something we talk about. What we do with our finances, but it's not something we talk about frequently because there's just so many things we need to talk about.
Right.
But I think there is this, for guys of my personality at least, like there's this thing where like because a stereotype exists, I'm going to be really careful to just never go anywhere near it. And then we do that topic a disservice by not getting in there.
Yeah.
And so we want to talk about that a little bit. We want to talk about what we do with our money. And I think,
like with our money, like your money and my money, or just money in general.
We can do whatever, right?
Because here's the thing. Just
go for it. Because I wonder if what you're thinking is what I'm thinking. Go ahead.
I just want to tag off of that because you've now mentioned the guys in the white shoes and who are on TV and people have this concept that when they give to a church, they're giving to the pastor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, almost like you and I on a Sunday morning go to the back of the room and
we check what's in the plate and
we're
divide it up.
checking the receipts and dividing it up, and that's now. There were days like that. They were actually before my time. I was in a church. And the previous pastor, who'd been there for 40 years, had changed the direction of that church because when he came in, what they would do is they would take the offering, and then he would go to the back of the room at the end of the service, and they would count the offering, and half would go to him, and the other half would go to the church's operating expenses. Huh. He would just be paid basically in cash.
Wow.
From the offering plate every Sunday morning, whatever. It was like a 50-50 deal. Huh. And he changed that. He actually established a budget for that church and said, you're going to pay me an established salary, and we're going to actually budget for our expenses. And because he just said that's just wrong. And he's right. It's just absolutely wrong.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm sure there are churches that still do that, but that blows my mind.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking, I was chatting about the topic with my wife over dinner last night, and her response was, I wonder if people realize that pastors tithe. Which is that honestly, that's always been a bit of a mind bender for me.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, like, as you're listening to this, where I'm at on this, like, because I think a lot of people don't even think about that. Like, one way of thinking about this is like, the church gives the pastor a salary, and then the pastor kicks back 10% of that salary, plus if his spouse works more, back to the church. And so it's like the church pays their pastor 10% less than they say they're going to pay. But that's one way that maybe people look at this. But my thought process on tithing has always been that I'm not actually giving to my church.
There's the key. That is absolutely the key.
When I tithe, I'm giving to God. This is a sacrifice for me. It's a sacrifice of my first fruits. I'm tying in that Old Testament concept of tithing, and I'm saying, like, off the top, God, like, as a statement of my reliance on you, as a statement of gratefulness, and as a statement of just your authority in my life, at least 10% of my income is coming back to you.
Yeah,
and then that the vehicle for that is my local church.
Always.
And then I give to places on top of that that aren't part of my local church.
Right.
And so, but yeah, she's like, I wonder if people realize that pastors do that too. Like, or if they're just, But yeah, that is the thing.
And that's key, because that's this whole concept of putting Jesus first in your life, right?
Yeah.
I think tithing is this super important expression of relationship. It's not, you're not supporting your local church or a group of charities with your 10%.
Exactly.
Right? You are identifying your relationship with Christ in that 10%.
Right. And that frees us. And I want to get into the budgeting thing, and I think we're getting into the budgeting thing by starting at the place where every Christian should start their budget.
Yeah.
And that's by establishing what your tithe is going to be.
Right.
And making that the first step in the process of writing out the rest of your budget. This is what my wife and I have done. We look at our total annual income, or our total income check to check, like however you want to establish a budget. And we start with writing out that number, that tithe number. And then what remains is what we do our percentages on everything else.
Right.
But when you do that,
you want to know what I've found is really helpful with that now? And maybe this is so here at Marsh, we have an online giving portal.
Mm-hmm.
And the online giving portal allows you to set up a recurring gift.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things that I've done is I've looked at my projected income for our household for the calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said, okay, so this is what I'm expecting. 10% of that is X.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to divide that over 52 weeks. I'm just going to set it up in the giving portal, and boom, it's going to automatically hit. So I'm already tithing and on what I'm projecting.
Yeah.
So, but then the other side of that is that I'm just going to look at my intent, and what I've been doing is I've actually been looking at some other things that have happened financially, and I've said, okay, so if God gave me more, where do I put that? Because I still have to tithe off of even the abundance.
I was going to ask you this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're starting this idea of tithe, and I do believe that a tithe is something that you do preemptively. Like,
yes.
You've made this decision before the checks start coming in.
Yes.
And so then my experience over life has been that when I have that discipline aligned correctly, that God always blesses.
Yeah.
And that what happens down the road from the decision to make that tithe and putting that plan into action is that God is always more abundant than I had planned.
Always.
Sometimes my expenses are more abundant than I had planned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm not like, it's not like I say, like, I've made this commitment to the Lord and now I'm wealthy, look at me. And everything in life has gone financially swimmingly. That's not true. But what I have found is when I make this discipline of tithing, and this is something that I've learned from a very early age, it's always been a priority for me as I've had an income, and it's something that my wife and I've had our whole marriage as well. Like this idea of setting up our tithe first, but then that when God blesses with the increase, what do you do with that? So you're saying you also monitor that and adjust how much you give based on that increase.
Yeah, I do. And there's a couple of different ways of handling that. I would kind of put that off for a few minutes in our conversation.
I think that goes into the giving part instead of the tithe part.
It does, exactly. But here's one of the key ingredients that I see with tithing. Many years ago, this whole story just kind of dawned on me. It was it's the account of Elijah and the widow.
Yeah.
Right? And Elijah comes to her house, And God leads him there, and he sits down in her house, and he says, I'm hungry. I'd like something to eat. And this woman, who, by the way, she's actually a Sidonian woman. She's not even Jewish, which is really, really cool.
Elisha is a sha.
It's Elisha.
This one,
no,
isn't it?
It's Elijah. It's during
the widow at Zarephath, not the, because they both have this, right?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Right. So he sits down in her house and he sits down. He says, "Give me something to eat." And,
the bread.
And her response is, "I have a handful of flour.
Yep.
I have a little bit of oil. I like this." She says, "I'm going to make a loaf of bread, and then my son and I are going to die because this is all we have. There's no hope of anything else. We're gonna make one last cake, one last loaf of bread, and then we're gonna die." And he says to her, "Make one for me first."
Yeah. The audacity.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Right. So he's saying, and this is something that, there's all kinds of liberal concepts out there on giving and compassion. Mm-hmm. This is the man of God saying to this woman who's struggling with a famine, and difference between a famine and an economic depression, folks. There's a huge difference. All right, a depression is there's plenty of food and goods. There just isn't enough money to buy the food and goods. A famine, you have all of the money in the world, but there's no food or goods to purchase. So I would say one of the struggles, one of the things that we're going through right now in the United States economically,
an economic famine, not an economic depression.
Exactly. We're not actually in an economic depression. We're in an economic famine, which will eventually cause an economic recession, depression, whatever you want to call it, because people have money.
Just don't have the goods to purchase.
They don't have the goods to purchase, which creates an economic downturn. So anyway, but he says to her, "Give me to eat. Make one for me first." And I think that's significant because she's already said, "We have enough for the two of us, and then we die." And she, I don't know why, she does it.
Yeah.
She actually makes a cake or a loaf of bread.
I always thought of them as pancakes.
For Elijah. Yeah, very similar, like a pita.
Yeah.
Right? She makes it for Elijah, and her flour and her oil do not run out until after the famine is over. And she feeds Elijah, and she feeds herself, and she feeds her son for however many days because she did first for God.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something. I'm not saying that your life will not lack turbulence or financial struggle when you tithe, but I think that the statement of a tithe, and the statement of the tithe is more than the value of the tithe.
Yes.
The statement of the tithe is, even before God blesses me, I'm blessing God.
Yeah.
So even before, I can look at my income and expenses for the future year. I can look at and I start by looking at my income, and I'm saying I'm going to make X money in 2022, 2023. So if I'm making X money, I'm going to take 10% right off the top of what I project and expect to make, and it's going boom right out. It's the first, actually, in our household, it's the first check we write. It's now, it's the first expense we've taken care of now with this automatic. And some people don't like that. I understand there's kind of you're losing touch with it. A lot of people are tactile.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there is something special to like participating in the worship service.
Sure.
By placing in the offering and having that as a tangible thing. And we've done some things to try and like play with that in our church because we understand that role.
Right. Here's another thing. Here's another thing that economically, some of you folks are retired, and you'll say, hey, I live on a fixed income, And, my response I've always wondered about that because, quite honestly, I'm on a fixed income as well. My salary is set for the year just like anybody else's, and my income is fixed.
Yeah.
I have the fixed income concept. If though you're in that retirement world and you have something like if you have like an IRA, a 401k, just heard about these recently, and you should probably talk to your financial advisor about this. But many of you are over age 72, and you have something called a required minimum distribution, which means that you've got to take so much money out of your account just because the government says you can't have it all. And you're saying to yourself, man, I really don't want to take that required minimum distribution every year. It's expensive. It's costing me, and so on. And it does. And I'm not making, there's nothing you can really do about that RMD except you can actually set your charitable giving up. And do I can't remember the exact name of it because I'm not a financial planner and I've never played one on TV. I'm a pastor, but you can actually set up an ongoing charitable giving program through your 401k that would remove money that would be qualified as your required minimum distribution, and you would still get tax benefit for it, but you don't have to pay tax on it. And
so it's like saving tax twice.
So yeah, instead you're not getting taxed on it at all. It actually just goes out and it doesn't get taxed. So
interesting.
Yeah, so it qualifies for your RMD. And like I said, talk to your accountant or your financial planner or your nephew who does your taxes. Whoever it is, but. That's one of those things, and it's something you set up at the beginning of the year. You just say, by God's grace, here's what I expect this money's coming out. I'm taking X from it, and I'm making sure that the Lord is going to be able. It's to the Lord.
Which is so
honor
key.
To Him.
And I think this is where people get themselves in trouble. We talked about Judas a couple weeks ago. I think it's where Judas often got himself in trouble.
Yeah.
When you start seeing that resource, and you are not giving it to the Lord, but giving it to a ministry or to an organization or to a church, then you still feel like you have some level of control over it once it's left your hand.
Right.
And then that's where you move from trying to be a good steward of resources to trying to control resources. And that's where there have been fights for centuries, and there always will be fights between church members and their churches and the decisions they make financially.
Right. The more open the hand, the more honorable the sacrifice.
Yeah.
I knew of a church one time that was struggling with some internal politics, and they had a general fund and they had a missions fund, and there were a bunch of people who were just offended by the internal politics, and they were actually taking their tithe and earmarking it toward missions.
So the church couldn't
church couldn't use it.
Wow.
And just starving the church to death. And just cruel and ungodly.
Yeah, which ultimately starves your missionaries when your church can't.
Right.
It doesn't exist.
Right. It's ungodly because here's the thing. You're not giving, if you're tithing to your local church, and you should be tithing to your local church. If you are tithing to your local church, you are not giving to support the pastor. You are not giving to support the programs. You're not giving to turn the lights on. You're not giving to any of those things. Yes, the money will be used for those things, but you're giving to the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? And what I believe and what I have seen is every time you give with that attitude of this, it's sacrificial, it's for the Lord, it's the first 10%. It is a statement of God's going to take care of my needs. Then God blesses.
Yeah.
And God blesses in abundance.
Yeah, and this was leading to another question I had that I have received frequently, is that how can I afford to tithe? Life is so expensive, and things in my world are so, like, I can, between between debts and loans and mortgages and rents and, activities that I am required to pay for, and a rising cost of energy, and my gas tank costs a mortgage payment. How can I afford to give? And I empathize with that sentiment, right?
Yeah.
I understand that tithing is expensive. 10% of your income, no matter what your income is felt. And I think that's the point.
Yes.
But my experience also, both personally and as I've helped people with budgeting, is that if you can't live on 90% of your income, you also can't live on 100% of it.
That's true. I feel like there's almost a Dave Ramsey type quote here where you almost want to say, how can you afford not to tithe?
Yeah.
Because just anecdotally, right, I've had these moments I had a woman, family I was talking to one Sunday in my church many, 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 many years ago. So this, no one, right? Having this conversation with this young family. They had 2 young daughters, and mom was telling me about how the mother was telling me about how, their children were so sick, and they were doing, they were going doctor's visits and hospital calls and just amazing illnesses that were striking this family. And I looked the woman in the eye and I said, "Are you tithing?" And she was, at first she was insulted that I had said that. And then she kind of, got a grip. Her husband's standing right behind her, and which is pretty typical of a lot of guys. They stand behind their wives rather than next to and in front of. But yeah, he's just, the 2 of them are standing there, and I said, "Are you tithing?" And she was kind of affronted, and then she says, "Well, we can't afford to tithe because of all of these medical expenses." And I said, "Try tithing, see if God doesn't take care of it." Because I said, here's the thing. I said, God's going to get the money one way or another, which is maybe sound weird. So a year later, she came to me and she said, first of all, she said, we were pretty angry with you when you said you tithed.
How much of your ministry do you think you've spent with somebody in your church angry with you?
Oh my goodness, this is life for me. It's like I'm amazed at how many times I say I'll just kind of put my finger on the wound, and it's like, this hurts, doesn't it? And they get mad, and then they come back. Thankfully, well, some of them
that's the
don't,
prayer, right?
That's the prayer. Is that when I put my finger on that wound, or go to heal that thing, my hope is that, well, they may run away from me, that they'll come back and allow me to just keep, and allow the Lord to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, she said they were affronted, and then they decided that they were going to tithe out of spite, just to show me that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And the girls had both been healthy. They hadn't actually seen their doctor in over a year's time, and they actually had more money for other things in their household that they didn't realize that they didn't have, because, they were tithing and their kids were healthy.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, isn't it amazing how that works?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot to that. I think that there's a lot of folks that say, I can't afford to tithe. And I just have this feeling of, how can you afford not to? It's when you're willing to put God first in your life, God provides the increase. He takes care of the problem.
Yeah. I think this is a deeply spiritual topic.
Money is.
And it intentionally follows the conversation we had last week with this idea of putting God first. And this is one of the most practical ways that you can do that, is by taking the thing that most people rely on, their income, and saying, with that thing that we all rely on, God, you own even this thing, and I want to tangibly demonstrate that I rely on you more than I rely on my paycheck. And the percentage of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck is staggering. the percent, the amount of debt that the average person holds is staggering. Like all of these things exist. And it's because the amount of people who don't tithe and put God first in their finances is staggering.
Huge.
And
Yep.
So this is deeply spiritual, and I think it should be one of the first things you do when you've made a decision that you're going to put God first. One of the first steps is to make sure that your finances are aligned with that idea, because where you spend your money is where your heart is.
So let's even piggyback a little bit off of that, right? Let's go to this Bible verse that every pastor uses at some time or another when he's teaching a tithing sermon or doing a stewardship service, and that's from Malachi chapter 3.
Yeah.
With the and Malachi's an awesome book because
cool.
Malachi is this book where Israel thinks that they're doing everything right and God is hating them.
Mm-hmm.
And Malachi comes alongside, and the word Malachi means messenger. So he comes alongside of them as a messenger of God, and his word to them is so here's what you're thinking, and it's over and over and over again. Here's what you think you're doing, right? Here's what you're actually doing, and here's why I hate you. Okay?
Yeah.
This is God saying, here's what you think you're doing, here's what you're actually doing, and here's why I hate you.
Yeah.
And here's how to solve that problem. So this whole tithing thing, right, is an aspect of Israel, because Israel had excused themselves from not giving a full tithe. Mm-hmm. They had said, life is hard, things are bad, taxes, whatever, and God says, great verse, right? God says, test me in this. I like that.
Yeah.
Test me in this, bring in the full tithe, and see if I don't open the floodgates of heaven. By the way, cool concept, because as many words as you have in 39 Old Testament books that are long and lengthy, this is only the second time that floodgate word is actually used in the entire Old Testament. The only other time that the word floodgate is used is in Genesis chapter 7, where God opens up the floodgates of heaven and pours out rain on the earth and floods it so that everything is destroyed. And if you don't believe in a universal flood, then you're going to also struggle with God's blessing to you in Malachi, because he says, I'm going to open, if you tithe, I'm going to open the floodgates of heaven and pour out blessing on you.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing that I see, because you're touching on this. I want to relate it back.
Mm-hmm.
Tithing is a number one item for truly prioritizing God in your life, because it's the place that God says, test me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Test me, right? So first place to see if God is genuine in what he says, and is going to be genuine in other places where he says, I need you to make me the priority, is this whole concept of tithing. You want to see God work in your life, tithe.
Right.
If you want to see what it's like for other places, like putting God first in your marriage, or putting God first in your job, or putting God first in your retirement, or putting God first in whatever other place in your life, you want to see what that's like, tithe.
Mm-hmm.
Make God first there. That's the test zone. And then what God's going to do in that test zone is he's going to pour out blessing on you. And you're going to say, wow, God bless me.
Right.
Like, wow, I chose to tithe. I set up the 10%, just like you said, at the beginning of my year. And I looked at my expenses, and I was going to run out of money in...
This happens to me.
So this happens to me, yeah, right?
So this is like a practical thing, right? So for a number of years, like, as I had said already, like tithing has been a part of my life for as long as I've had an income, but budgeting has not been. And this is kind of the step 2 in the conversation, is this idea of establishing a budget and starting with a tithe to make a good budget.
Right.
But over the last 10 years or so, we've tracked our finances more carefully. And that's done a couple of things. What a good budget should do is it should constrain you, and it should also free you. And it constrains overspending, and it also frees you to spend in the areas where you would like to, or where you need to, because your money goes where it's supposed to go, and you understand what it's doing. And when we started doing that, we noticed a couple of things. Like, we noticed places where we were overspending and places where we were wasting money. We found ways to make our money work better for us. But what tracking our money also did was it actually demonstrated with frequency the number of times God was blessing us financially beyond our expectation.
Yes.
We as a church, we practice this event in November called Sacrifice Sunday, which is a sacrificial offering that goes over and above our tithe. So we've got our tithe established at the beginning of the year. We understand what that's going to be. You might establish that at the beginning of your fiscal year, or whenever you get your annual contract or whatever. Like, you make this establishment, you set aside the tithe to the Lord, and you begin that process of committing it to Him. What I find in my budgeting every year is when I get to that Sacrifice Sunday date, I can look at it coming in my spreadsheet, and those numbers, the closer and closer I get to that day, go red, and they go from black to red.
Right.
And they will often go from black to red in the exact amount of my planned sacrificial gift.
Yes.
And then what's cool, again, this is what good budgeting does, is when I make that sacrificial gift anyway, every year, somehow those red numbers go black again.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, I don't make the annual accounting mistake. I'm not great with math, but I know I'm not making an annual accounting mistake. What I do know is that when I'm carefully budgeting and watching my resources, and I am putting God first in my tithe and in my life, that God meets my needs.
Yeah. Every single
And when
one
I track well, that gives me more opportunity for praise, because now I get to see something that God's been doing all along and I wasn't noticing. And now I can see it happening because I'm paying attention, and it gives me more opportunity to praise the Lord for things that He's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the joys of tithing. So, bam, I see God open up the floodgates. So then it shouldn't have worked. It does work because God does it. Mm-hmm. Now, because I see that in my finances, then I can say, okay, so I'm going to be a great husband by putting God first in my life, ministering to my wife, developing her relationship with Jesus, purifying her, which might mean sometimes actually rebuking her and directing her spiritually. I'm going to do all of those things because God has said I should do that, and God has shown me in my tithe that He's willing to bless me if I put Him first in my life. So boom, and now I've got Christ in my marriage, or I've got Christ in my workplace. And it's because I start with this concept of tithing.
Yeah.
And saying, all right, my money, I'm going to test God. I'm going to see Him at work in this.
Yeah. Because I'm not a math guy. And some of you listening to this are math people. Like, our church is full of math people.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that I think draws a certain personality type toward math, and that is it is definite and measurable.
Yes.
Right? It's the beauty of mathematics. You can't, well, at least we can't yet. Culturally, this may shift, but right now you cannot add 2 and 2 and get anything other than 4. That's how math works, and it's why so many find comfort in numbers.
Right.
Because it's not variable like that, right? It's something that's easily defined. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that God knew about His creation when He asked His followers to give to Him. Because we can look at numbers as something that is easily defined and measurable. And we can look at our income as something that is easily defined and is easily measurable. And we can, when we place it first and give to the Lord first, then it is really easy to see blessing. Like, it's not as easy to see blessing relationally.
Right.
Like, you can't,
right.
You don't necessarily measure like your mental health. You don't necessarily measure like your on a regular basis, whether your kids are maturing in a way that pleases the Lord or if they need help, right? Those are things that take more effort and more time and more observation and work.
Yes.
But it's easier to track numbers. And so one of the things that is a wonderful blessing from God in participating in the tithe first and putting him first is it gives us something to measure and watch him respond to, which then opens up our ability to trust him in so many other places and practically place him first in other areas of life too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we wanted to talk, so we're placing God first in a tithe, and then we probably need to talk about budgeting. You kind of brought that up.
Yeah.
And I have worked with this budget structure for many, many years, and it's the idea of after I've got my net, so I've taken out, so the government has taken out all that they want, and I've given to myself by funding my 401k, IRA, whatever it is. And if you work for a company and they're willing to give you some kind of matching fund,
maximize that.
Maximize that. That's just that's just earning money. It's free money, and I think you should do that. But so you take your net, and now your net has to go into. Dave Ramsey calls them envelopes, and he actually.
Does he still do the? I wonder if he still does.
I don't know if he does the envelope thing,
but he still
his started out that way.
And now it's like you got to give every dollar a name. Is his little catchphrase?
Is that his thing now? Okay.
Yeah, which I love. Right?
Yeah,
that is actually.
Yeah,
I think we've talked about this before. Like Dave Ramsey was really helpful for us financially, but I don't necessarily do everything he says. Some of you just turned our podcast off.
Yes.
For those of you still with us, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
But the idea is you like with what's remaining, you want to make all of that money go somewhere specific, or else it'll disappear on you.
Right. Money is funny that way. If it's not really well tracked, it'll sneak out on its own.
Yeah.
I've always been amazed at how quickly untracked money can just disappear. So, and I think that's why so Dave Ramsey is a big cash guy, cash and debit cards and stuff, and I hate those. Okay, I hate cash because it's too spendable. I like the fact that, for example, that my check from my salary gets direct deposited, and I know that the day that it's going to go in, and that's actually helped me over time with another aspect of budgeting we probably should talk about, which is cash flow, and that because I know what my check is going to be on Friday, and so I pay all of my bills on Thursday. And that way, I know that
the checking account gets replenished just in time to not go.
So that I'm not looking at my bank account and saying, "Wow, I'm
loaded."
Dollars in here. I can go and spend those dollars because can't because I just wrote all of those checks and they're going to cover my. So I try to do those things just to keep. I hate liquidity. Okay, there's a term for you. Maybe
It's financial term of the week.
Financial term of the week. Liquidity. In other words, how spendable is it? And a check is less spendable than cash. A direct deposit is less spendable than a check. So you want to keep things as illiquid as possible. And I think that's a good concept. But I call them buckets. So I have spending buckets. So like if you're owning a house or you're renting a house, you're going to say, okay, I should plan on 30% of my expenses going to pay for housing expenses. So mortgage, rent, insurance, utilities. That varies from place to place. I think. I
think you can go up to like 40%, like here and in more expensive areas. But
right.
If you get much higher than that, which is tempting because of how expensive places are to live,
San Francisco and Hawaii, I think it's 50 to 55%.
Yeah, so it can really choke out your ability to do other things.
Right,
for sure.
Right. So you regionalize some of that. So, but my one bucket is 30 to 35% for that, and then 15% for your food expenses, 15% for your vehicle expenses, which means if you just recently bought a Maserati and you're trying to justify that car payment on that Maserati, you probably did a foolish thing. You probably should have said, okay, here's 15%. I've got to cover gasoline, which is a rising cost, and plus insurance, plus repairs, plus plus a car payment. And maybe this is why I saw this morning that automobile sales have actually already entered recessionary territory. If people are not buying cars right now. Of course, you couldn't buy them for a while because of the chips or whatever.
Yeah, and now they're throwing the lots. We can't buy them because we can't afford to fuel them and
you
maintain
can't
them.
Fuel them, you can't maintain them, and you can't insure them. So people are just saying, I'm going to survive on what I have.
Mm-hmm.
And even car parts, I saw this morning, even car parts are down in sale, in consumer pricing.
Huh.
Because people are actually delaying repairs on their
I'll just
cars.
deal with this for a little while.
Because because it's just too expensive. If you're operating with if you're saying, okay, 15% of my budget has to go toward this, then, great. You try and live within the 15%.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the deal, right? If you're over 15%, if you're 18%, 3% has to come from somewhere. Are you going to lower your food expenses by 3%? Mm-hmm. I have other expenses in my work budget that talks about things like clothing. Having a clothing allowance, because if you work someplace other than on Zoom, you need to buy pants. Mm-hmm. Just a miscellaneous fund for stuff that you just didn't have in your budget. A health fund, because you could have the greatest insurance in the world and you're still going to have co-pays, or a vacation fund, because I believe that vacationing is important.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
So, even if you don't have a huge income, you should be taking 5 to 7% of your income and sticking it aside and saying, I'm going to do something to take me someplace other than where I am.
Yep. Yeah.
Just for rest and relaxation. So, believe it or not, it doesn't use 100%. My plan does not. The plan that I have doesn't use 100%. But if I fudge all of that together, and maybe one's 18%, and maybe I've got some extra expenses here, in the bottom I have something that I call God's abundance.
Okay.
All right. God's abundance is, here's what I've taken care of my needs. Mm-hmm. Taken care of my need for shelter. I've taken care of my need for food. I've taken care of my need for clothing and for health and prosperity. These have been my basic needs. I'm basically living on probably about 85% of my paycheck after tithe. Mm-hmm. And if I can live within that zone, I'm doing really, really well. But I've got this 15%. What do I do with that? And here's where abundance comes in. This is the abundance that God wants me to use.
Yeah. Right?
So I'll take 10% of my abundance, and that's now extra giving. This is where, and it's controversial, because every week I've got to be somewhat controversial, right? If you want to support your friend who's a missionary,
yep,
this is where that's done, not up here in your tithe level.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Your tithe is going to your church.
Right.
Your tithe is going to your church. Your tithe is get the point.
Yeah.
Your tithe does not go to, I'm going to give 60% of it to my church and 10% to the Christian college that I went to, and another 10% to these people and 10% to the homeless. Mm-hmm. Your tithe, that full 10%, that Malachi portion, bring in the full tithe.
Yep.
That's up there. Now I'm down here now I'm down here after I've taken care of my basic needs, and I'm taking 10% of that. Mm-hmm. I'm taking $10, 10%. If I've got $100 a week, $10. This is not even $10, because I've taken $10 off. I'm taking $9.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm saying, okay, I've got this $9 that I'm going to give to my friend who's a missionary, the Christian college that I attended, the
church's capital campaign.
The church's capital campaign. Here's the best place. The family in my church that's trying to send their kid to a Christian high school because the public school stinks.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? The friend of mine in my church whose children would love to go to a Christian camp this summer, I'm going to pay for them to go to a Christian camp.
That,
I would much prefer...
That guy who can't afford to go to a men's retreat but needs to be there. Yeah.
Listen, before you start giving to ABC Charity, who is going to take 10 to 40% of your giving to them and use it to cover the administrative costs of their president, vice president, secretary, and so on. But look, folks, I know of a charity that was set up to do something like environmental. It's an environment charity.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think that they have actually done a single environment thing in the last 5 years. All of their money comes into this environmental thing that they send out a newsletter for, and the rest goes to the administrative expenses of the charity.
Yeah.
Right? I would much rather you take your abundance and find somebody close by to use it on.
Mm-hmm. It's so much more rewarding, too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Take your abundance and buy groceries for a family that you know. Take your abundance and send a kid to Christian high school. Take your abundance and connecting with others in your church. Do a scholarship to a Christian college. The kids that come up in your church youth group who choose to go to a good Christian school for their education. Start a fund and set up a scholarship fund for students in your church.
Yep.
You know, you and I know of a guy who is exceptionally wealthy. Like, this guy drips money. Absolutely drips money. He's the most impressive guy you ever wanted to meet, because you wouldn't know that he drips money, except that
he's got some gorgeous real estate.
He's got some amazing stuff, right? He has the stuff. Listen, he has the stuff.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
But so here's this thing. This guy goes to this church, and he, if you will go to the Christian college, very good Christian college that he, and that did not work.
You were supposed to mute that thing.
I did. Anyway, if you go to the Christian college, very good Christian college that he happens to be a trustee for, you graduate from that. You graduate from high school in that church's youth group, and you want to go to that school, he pays your tuition.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how many kids in that church in a given year. If they want to go to that Christian school, he pays their tuition.
And a bunch of you are going to be writing in at podcast@marshcorner.com to find out where they need to now go to church.
Yes.
I get it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is a cool example of working. I mean, in that case, like, he's working with an exceptional abundance.
He's taking
but you
his
don't
abundance.
have to wait. You don't have to, like, that's not something that you, like, plan on someday down the road if God makes you a multimillionaire.
No, you do it now.
You do that now.
Yes.
And, like, if it's $7 that you've got left over, take the $7, find somebody who's just started coming to your church and go get Dunkin' Donuts coffee with them and pay for their coffee. Like, and ask them about
change on that.
Yeah. Ask them, and then get to know them. Ask them about their relationship with the Lord. Spend some time praying over them. Like, use that. Right. It doesn't have to be send a kid to college, although there are a lot of kids who could use that help in life. But this is where that abundance piece comes into your budget, into your accounting.
Absolutely.
This is one of those areas actually where I differ from Ramsey. So, like, one of the things that Ramsey focuses on, rightfully so, given the world we're in, is his thing. The number one thing that keeps people from wealth is their debt load, and so he's hyper focused on removing debt from people's lives, which is a good thing.
Good, yeah.
And it's because managing debt well is like a near Herculean feat, and so it's easier for most people to just eliminate that altogether. And so his thing is you create like a safety net financially, then you eliminate debt, then you increase that safety net, and then down the road, after moving through a few of these early steps, then you get to that point where you get to be generous. And I would rather you not wait that long.
I agree.
I would rather you plan on generosity early.
Yes.
And as you are planning on generosity with your income, no matter how that is, like it doesn't have to be extravagant, but just plan on generosity. You start with tithe, and then you work your budget however you need to work that for your financial situation. But in the process of writing that budget, plan on extravagant generosity, whatever that is within the constraints of what you make, and then use that and be blessed by it.
Right. Without going into debt. I know of people, I do know of people who are using their credit cards to be exceptionally generous to ministries and got themselves into debt issues. That's not how you do this. This is out. Remember, this is out of your abundance. This is after you've paid your bills. This is after you've paid your credit card bills off. I think that if you do it well and you manage your debt well and so on, then you actually get to a place where you have this regular abundance, especially if God is first in your tithing.
Right.
So
I guess this is a place we're gonna pause, I guess, this conversation for now, because I think the money
we get some questions.
The
on
money
this.
question
This
is
would be great.
challenging,
Yeah.
and everybody's got their own unique circumstance or situation that's not unique. But we all feel it always feels unique. And so if you have questions on this, please follow up with us. And we'll do our best as financial advisors who are non-licensed and not, you get all this stuff, right? Like you can't talk about money or medical things without having a diploma, apparently. But, if you want the non-diplomaed, just life skills response, we're the guys.
Right.
And so if you've got questions about money management or things like that, feel free to reach out and ask those. But our advice is that the point of the episode even is that one of the most practical ways of putting God first in your life and demonstrating his priority over everything else is to make sure that we're tithing.
Yes.
And you will find great blessing that is measurable if you choose to pursue that discipline. So it's worth doing. Give it a try. Write back and let us know how that's gone for your life and for your family income and for your financial health. And we can maybe even share some of those stories anonymously.
Yeah.
To celebrate God's goodness, because he is a good God.
Amen.
Well, we're glad you've joined us today. We will catch you back here next time. Bye, everyone. You have been listening to Inside the Pastor Study podcast with Pastors George and Jeremy Stevens. Artwork by Caitlin Gallagher, music by Sam Demetrius, and engineering help from Ashley Gallagher. To find out more about us, head to marshcorner.com.